In this next episode of our Jerusalem from Genesis to Jesus series, we explore the time when Jerusalem was destroyed by Rome and the Jewish followers of Jesus were uprooted from Jerusalem. This is the city of Jerusalem. In our quest to explore Jerusalem from Genesis to Jesus, we have come to yet another tragic era in Jerusalem's vast and incredibly meaningful history. A time when powerful Roman legions completely destroyed the city and not one stone of the Jewish temple was left intact, just as Jesus mournfully predicted. We've arrived at the time when King Herod's beautiful Jerusalem, the Jerusalem that Jesus and his followers were so familiar with, came crumbling to the ground. So what will become of Jerusalem now? The legacy of Jesus in Jerusalem did not end with his death, resurrection, and ascension. After the Pentecost, which followed his ascension, Jewish followers of Jesus only multiplied in Jerusalem, although no churches were built initially. That's because these followers of Jesus continued to faithfully meet in the temple and synagogues. But decades later, everything changed for Jerusalem when Rome became determined to put an absolute end to Jewish revolts throughout Judea. There is still a period of sort of Roman reign that leads to the destruction of the temple. Tell us a little bit about that time period.
Right. So eventually this external tension combined with infighting with the Jewish people will lead to what's called the Great Revolt from the year 66 to the year 70. The final act is the fall of that fortress of Masada 3 years later, but the revolt officially ends in 70. And that is, again, it starts, by the way, as not a unified revolt against the Romans. Like the Zealots mostly trigger it. It's really triggered by the Romans, who are really, and the pagan inhabitants of places like Caesarea, who are really goading the Jews on and doing like violent acts and provocations, and Israel's at the breaking point. It's like the gunpowder's there, just drop the match. And it's years of abuse and these different procurators like Pontius Pilate and Florus and people like that who are using their position of power to basically enrich themselves at the expense of the population and very brutally persecuting the Jewish inhabitants. Eventually, that's the straw that breaks the camel's back, is an event in Caesarea that triggers a revolt that is not unified. And certain cities in Israel join the revolt, certain cities do not. Any city that doesn't, the Romans come back with 4 legions. Vespasian and his son Titus from across the Mediterranean and from Syria come and spend the next 4 years basically systematically suppressing any city that doesn't surrender, including Jerusalem, is totally decimated. People crucified by the thousands, the city leveled, the trees cut down, put salt in the earth. The Romans like to punish very extremely. Wow. So after 3 years of this revolt, during which a lot of the time there's a civil war going on in Israel between different zealot groups fighting over each other. That's an unfortunate trait of the Jewish people, is when people are we're often killing each other as people are trying to come and kill us from the outside. We're very fractious people. So the combination leads to, in the year 70, finally, Vespasian's already gone back to Rome to fight to become emperor. Titus, his son, completes the siege, just like Nebuchadnezzar of Babylon. Same date, 9th of Av. Yeah. That the first temple is destroyed on the same date. Hundreds of years later, the second temple is destroyed. And Jerusalem is leveled and left in ruins. And the Temple Mount is just left completely empty until the Muslims 700 years later are going to build a building on top of it.
Wow. When the Romans attacked Jerusalem, the places most significant to Jesus and his earliest followers were completely destroyed, and the prophecy of Jesus was fulfilled. Not one stone of the temple was left standing on top of another. this is evidence of the destruction of the temple. Talk to us about this massive, I mean, these are huge, this massive pile of stones.
Absolutely. We are talking about the bitter end of Jerusalem, 70 AD. Remember that in the year 66 AD, this was the beginning of the big Jewish revolt against the Romans. Big revolt started in 66 AD, ended 4 years later, 70 AD. Now, during the time of the big revolt, as an act of revolt, the Jews said, you know what? Up until today, we used Roman currency. Remember, the currency in Jerusalem, other parts of the country, was Roman.
Okay.
But from the moment that the Jews started to revolt against the Romans, they said, you know what? From now on, we will not continue to use anymore Roman currency. We are going to make our own coins. So in the year 66 AD, they minted their own coins. Now, one side of the coin, it was written year 1 to the big revolt, and on the back of the coin, it was written to the freedom of Jerusalem. Imagine to yourself that in 67 AD, they made other coins that one side said year 2 to the big revolt and to the freedom of Zion. And in the coins minted in 70 AD, one side it was written year 5 to the big revolt,
okay,
and on the back, freedom of Zion. Now, guess what? During the time of the archaeological excavations, under this pile of the stones, and soon we will talk more about the stones, archaeologists discovered lots of these coins with year 1, year 2, year 3, year 4, and year 5 to the big revolt.
But no year 6.
No year 6, because 70 AD, that was the end of the big revolt.
Right.
But the coins that said year 5 to the big revolt are the most dramatic coins, because these coins were minted shortly before the destruction of the city. Now, 70 AD, eventually the Romans managed to occupy Jerusalem. What did they do? Few things. Number one, up there, they destroyed the second temple completely. Now, when the Romans destroyed the temple, they didn't leave even one stone on top of the another. They even didn't leave one single stone on the level of the bedrock. So they destroyed everything until the level of the bedrock. And also, when they came here, they destroyed the upper part of the retaining walls. You remember we learned that when Herod wanted to build the Temple Mount, he built the 4 retaining walls.
Right. Yeah.
So 70 AD, the Romans destroyed the upper part of the retaining walls. So you see these stones, they fell from the top of the western wall.
Wow.
We have to understand that originally this wall was much taller, much higher. So when the Romans destroyed the upper part of the wall fell down here and was crushed here, right in the middle of the streets. So these stones fell from the top.
Incredible.
Which means today we can definitely say that if you want to rebuild Temple Mount, no problem. All we have to do is to lift up these stones and to put them back in the right place.
Right.
But this is not the end yet. Please come with me. I want to show you some more evidence of the destruction.
Okay.
So, my very dear friend Jeff, over here we can see the Herodian pavement, but you can see the big heavy damage that we have here. You can see that these stones are all broken. Why is that? Because right now we are standing under what used to be Robinson's Arch. Okay. Remember, Robinson's Arch was above our heads. And in 70 AD, when the Romans destroyed the temple and the Temple Mount, also they destroyed Robinson's Arch. Archaeologists came to the conclusion that the weight of Robinson's Arch was 1,600 tons.
Wow.
Imagine to yourself, 1,600 tons fell from the top and was crushed here, right in the middle of the street. So the impact was like the impact of an earthquake. This is why you can see the big heavy damage here.
Yes.
This is why you can see how these stones are completely broken and cracked. And by the way, 67, when Israeli archaeologists came here, they did find here the pile of the stones that originally came from Robinson's Arch.
Ah, okay.
But when they prepared this park, they simply removed these stones. So the only stones that we can see until today are these stones that we have further to the north.
And
so
there's a lot of them.
There is a lot of them.
Yeah.
So this emphasizes how dramatic was the bitter end of Jerusalem in 70 AD.
Wow, amazing. Thank you, Isaac.
You're welcome. And we will see some more.
Let's go.
Let's go.
Don't go away. When we come back, I see a Jewish coin from year 3 of the Jewish Revolt and visit a Roman theater built right next to the Western Wall.
The nation of Israel and the Jewish people have just suffered horrendous attacks not seen since World War II. However, Israel and the Jewish people are not alone. First Century Foundations has been actively supporting the people of Israel for nearly 40 years, providing food, clothing, and shelter for those in need, especially in these desperate times. When you give a gift of $30 or more, you are not only helping support the people of Israel, you are also showing that you care and are blessing God's chosen people in their hour of need. And when you give your gift, as a thank you, you will receive the bi-monthly newsletter and Israel Prayer Watch. And for monthly donations, we will send you the book, Praying for the Peace of Jerusalem. Call now, 1-877-628-2800, or visit us online at firstcenturyfoundations.com and help the people of Israel during these dangerous times.
The massive stones that came crashing down as the Romans demolished the temple never cease to amaze me. They really bring this tragic event to life. But even more exhilarating for me was a visit to the Israel Antiquities coin collection at the Israel Museum. There, Dr. Robert Kuhl showed me a treasure dating just prior to the temple's destruction that I could actually hold in my hand.
We have a beautiful shekel, which was minted during the Jewish Revolt against the Romans. It's the revolt which takes place between 66 and 70. It starts during the time of Neron, the Emperor Neron, and it ends with Vespasian and Titus. The Jews revolted, and as a sign of sovereignty, as a sign of saying we are independent, the first thing they did was mint coins. And again, we have this use of this ancient script. Yeah, and it says, and the coins really show. This coin shows Shin Gimel, yeah, and the year 3, yeah, Shekel Yisrael, yeah, and the other side, Jerusalem the Holy, Yerushalayim HaKdosha.
Beautiful.
Yeah.
And minting the coins was a strong message to
a very strong
the
message.
Romans. Yeah.
Because it's not like the Hasmoneans, they were minted in bronze. This coin was minted in silver.
Sure.
So that was really like, you know, this was a full-scale insurrection against Roman authority.
They were making a statement.
Very much. And of course the Romans, well, we know history. We know what the Romans did.
Wow. It was breathtaking to see a coin that dated so closely to the destruction of the temple. What a terrible time in Jerusalem's history. The holy city and mountain God chose and loves according to the Hebrew Bible was destroyed. And Jerusalem would soon become the Roman city of Aelia Capitolina.
So now, after the destruction of the temple, about 60 years later, there was another Jewish revolt, which is, we call it the Bar Kokhba revolt. It started at 129, and ended in 135. Following it, the Romans who ruled the country built a new city in Jerusalem. We call it Aelia Capitolina, Aelia after the name of Emperor Hadrian, and Capitolina because the gods of the city were what we call the Capitoline Triad, which is Jupiter, Juno, and Minerva. Moreover, they changed completely the face of the city, and suddenly you can see here, right by the western wall, you can see a kind of a little theater.
Yes.
The question, it was never finished, by the way, because with the victory of Christianity, they of course stopped all the Roman pagan institutions. And now the question is, what did it serve as? Some people believe it was the city council, which is called in Greek, in the Roman world, bouleuterion. Others think that it was an odeon, where they used to recite odes. This is, so we really don't know, because we don't have the full information about the site, because it was never finished, as a matter of fact. Above us is an enormous arch, which is named the Wilson's Arch. Wilson after its discoverer in the 19th century. And the thing is that the question is, how was it covered? Originally with roof tiles, which were found in quite a great number. And so it was. And the interesting thing is that they had to bring a lot of fill, which you can see everywhere, for the seats, for the rows of seats, but they never did it. But the interesting thing is that it was done right by the western wall of the Temple Mount.
After the Romans destroyed Jerusalem, it became a completely different city. The eerie grandeur of Aelia Capitolina can be felt when you walk down its ancient main street, or Cardo. Well, Isaac, we're here in the Jewish quarter. I've walked by this place many times.
Yes.
I know that it's old, but explain to me exactly what it is we're standing in and what time of history that we're talking about here.
Hadrian decided to build here a new city. And as we said, he changed the name of the city from Jerusalem to Aelia Capitolina. Now, in the center, in the middle of Aelia Capitolina, he built this street that you see here, the Cardo. So right now we're standing in the middle of the Roman Cardo, 2nd century AD, Hadrian.
Okay.
Please remember that during Roman era, always when the Romans built new cities, in the center of every city, they had the main street called Cardo. Usually the Cardo started in the most northern part of the city and crossed the city all the way down to the most southern point. Now, the word Cardo is taken from the Latin word cuore, which in translation to English means heart. Same way as the heart is the most important part in our body, this is how the Cardo during Roman era was like the heart of every city. And by the way, even nowadays, when we say the word cardiology, the word cardiology is taken from the word Cardo. Originally, the Cardo started in the most northern part of Jerusalem of those days, Damascus Gate, and from there it continued all the way down to Mount Zion. So the pavement that we see here is originally Roman, 2nd century AD. Okay. Now, it's very interesting to see where was street level of Jerusalem, 2nd century AD, and you see where is the street level of today.
Yes.
Now, this pavement that we see here, this was the central part of the street. This was used only for the transportation of those days, which means donkeys, camels, chariots, and things like that. Now, if we please take a look this way. Now, what do we have here? In your imagination, try to imagine that along this side, western side of the Cardo, there was a very long line of columns.
Right.
On top of every column, we have the capital of the columns, and these columns supported a big roof. So the roof covered the space between the columns all the way to the cliff, which means that this place where we're standing right now, this is one of the pavement. one of the sidewalks that went along the western side of the Cardo.
And these were covered as well as all the way over there?
Exactly.
Okay.
Since this was the main street here in Jerusalem in those days, so at that time this also was one of the main shopping centers of Jerusalem.
Oh, okay.
So you see these two ancient arches.
Yes.
A very good example of some of the original ancient Roman shops. Now over here we can see more and more of the original entrances to the original Roman shops. So in your imagination, imagine that all the way along this side of the street, there were lots of shops. So this was the place where people would go shopping. Now, this is only one side of the streets. 23 meters, which means 69 feet further to the east is that way, archaeologists discovered the eastern side of the Cardo.
Wow.
So 23 meters or 69 feet further to the east, the same like what we see here, but on the other side. Another long line of columns with capitals that supported a big roof, and also many more shops along the eastern side of the Cardo. Okay. So this really helps us to imagine and to understand how long, how wide, and how impressive was this Cardo that crossed the heart of Aelia Capitolina.
Yes.
Walking down the Cardo of Aelia Capitolina is always heartbreaking for me. It represents a time when Rome had officially destroyed the temple and tried to strip this city of its deep significance to Jews everywhere. Even Jewish followers of Jesus based in Jerusalem were severed from their precious city, and Christianity would never be the same. Don't go away, we'll be right back.
I was a pastor for over 20 years before I first went to Israel, only to realize that I had been totally disconnected from the roots of my faith. Since then, I've been on a journey of discovery, and my faith has come alive in ways I never could have imagined. I'm Jeff Futers, Director of First Century Foundations, and I am excited to invite you on my journey to the foundations of our faith, to discover your part in a Bible story that isn't over yet. First Century Foundations exists to reconnect Christians to the foundations of Christianity. And we do this by creating Bible-based media focused on Israel and the Jewish roots of our faith. But we don't just reconnect you to Israel's history, we help you participate in what God is doing in Israel today by connecting you to over 70 incredible ministries in Israel who desperately need our support. Will you partner with us? Together, we'll explore Israel's significant past while doing our part to ensure that Israel has a bright future.
To learn more about Jerusalem's transition into a Christian city, I visited the Church of St. Peter in Gallicantu, a beautiful church on the eastern slope of Mount Zion, commemorating Peter's denial of Jesus. Here, Danny showed me an incredible model of Jerusalem I had never seen before.
So, Danny, we're here at, it looks like another model of Jerusalem, similar to what we saw from the Second Temple period, but there are some obvious differences here. What are we looking at?
This is Jerusalem when it's all Christianized.
Okay, and so we're seeing a number of very prominent buildings.
Yes.
And also seeing a very large empty space.
Empty space there.
Yeah,
yes.
So what's going on
But wait,
here?
first, if we want to do this properly in a chronological order, first Jerusalem as Jesus knew it, as we saw it in the model by the Israel Museum,
right,
was razed to the ground by the Romans. And then the Romans rebuilt the city, but as a pagan city. They called it Aelia Capitolina. They had several pagan temples scattered around the city. They redesigned the northern part, the area of Damascus Gate.
Okay.
Had an inner courtyard and two main streets coming out of it. The model is showing it very well. And in the northern part, they also made a big triumphal arch, probably to mark the victory against the Jews, both against the first rebellion and against the second rebellion, the Bar Kokhba rebellion. We're not even sure if the city was walled. The 10th Legion was set here for 300 years just to make sure those Jews who dared rebel against us, against the Romans, won't even think of rebelling again or taking possessions in Jerusalem. The Jews were banned from even getting close to the city at that time. But then, in the 4th century, the same Romans who put Jesus to death turned him into God. That's the Christianization of the whole Roman Empire. And of course, Jerusalem is where major events relating to the divinity of Jesus took place.
Right.
Now the Christianized Roman world is so interested in it. And what could be more important than the place where he was crucified, died, buried, and came back from the dead?
Right.
Where is it? In the 4th century, it is identified right there. According to a legend, the Empress Helena comes to Jerusalem and she's shown the place. She makes a discovery of a remnant of the cross. She's convinced this is it. And then a giant church is built over it. A combination of a basilica and a rotunda, which marks, again, the place of the crucifixion, the death, the burial, and the resurrection, the most important part. And from that point on, the city is identified and sanctified in different places. So if you were to visit Jerusalem in the 7th century, you would see about 50 churches and monasteries in and around the city. But the city was all Christianized.
Wow.
And Jews were still forbidden, by the way. The Jews up to the 5th century were not allowed to visit Jerusalem. And when it was changed, it was only one day of the year, Tisha B'Av, the day that their temple was destroyed. And notice how their temple is left in ruins for the Byzantine period.
I was going to ask about that. It's a big empty space.
Big empty space that is left deliberately in ruins because from a theological Christian point of view, its destruction is proof of the right faith of following Jesus.
And during this time, only on the 9th of Av could Jews visit.
Yes.
Wow.
Yes, it was to humiliate them. Okay, you can only come here to weep and mourn over the loss of your temple. It will change with the Muslim takeover. Once the Muslim conquered the city, they either kick out the Christians or impose heavy taxes, and the economy is on decline. So what do? Abdel Malik invites 70 Jewish families from Tiberias to settle here so there'll be some economy. So actually, in the beginning, the Muslims encouraged Jews to settle here, but that also changed later.
Okay. The exile of the Jewish people from their beloved Jerusalem was tragic indeed. The vast and meaningful history of God's chosen people in this city seemed to have come to an end. Although Jesus and his earliest followers were Jewish and felt deep affection for this city and the temple, later followers of Jesus seemed to completely forget this. In their minds, God had completely rejected his people. Sadly, this was only the beginning of Christians claiming ownership of Jerusalem and forgetting the Jewish heritage of Jesus and his earliest followers. Please join me again next time, right here in God's chosen city, as we continue our quest to discover Jerusalem from Genesis to Jesus.